Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome everyone here. Bienvenue à tous. Colleagues, this meeting today is called pursuant to the standing orders, pursuant to Standing Order 108, Chapter 5, Manage the Delivery of Legal Services to Government, Department of Justice, Canada. This is contained in the May 2007 report of the Auditor General of Canada. And today the committee is very pleased to have with us the Auditor General, Ms. Sheila Fraser. She's accompanied by Assistant Auditor General, Mr. Hugh McRoberts, and Mr. Gordon Stock, Principal. From the Department of Justice, we have the Accounting Officer, Mr. John H. Sims. He's accompanied by the Associate Deputy Minister, Yves Cote, and Mr. Terence McCauley, the Acting Assistant Deputy Minister, Management Sector. So, again, on behalf of the committee, I want to extend to each and every one of you a very warm welcome. And I understand, Ms. Fraser, you have some opening comments, and I turn the floor over to you now.
Thank you, Chair. We thank you for inviting us to discuss Chapter 5 of our May 2007 report entitled Managing the Delivery of Legal Services to Government, an audit of the Department of Justice Canada. It should be noted that our audit work for this chapter was completed in December of 2006. Accompanying me today, as you mentioned, are Hugh McRoberts, Assistant Auditor General, and Gordon Stock, Principal of the Public Safety and Justice Audit Team, who were responsible for this audit. The Department of Justice Canada can be characterized as Canada's largest law firm, with approximately 2,500 lawyers and a budget for the 2006-07 fiscal year of close to $1 billion. The department provides legal services to the government and its departments and agencies. Many of its lawyers work on-site in the departments and agencies, providing legal advice and representing their clients' interests. They draft legislation and regulations and represent the government in court. As noted in our report, our audit also included examining the management of prosecution services that were provided by the Federal Prosecution Service, a branch of the Department of Justice at the time. The service was transferred to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions with the coming into force of the Federal Accountability Act. Our findings and recommendations relate to the work now carried out by the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions as well as the Department.
Our audit looked at three primary areas: whether progress had been made since our last audit on this topic in 1993, whether management had assurance that it was delivering quality legal services, and whether it was doing so in a cost-effective manner. We found that the department had made progress since our last audit in its management of litigation risk. Its lawyers regularly assess the likelihood and potential impact of an adverse outcome and use this assessment to determine the level of management involvement required. The department also showed progress in its screening and supervision of its legal Crown agents for the Federal Prosecution Services and had demonstrated its progress towards completing an action plan in this area. However, this progress did not extend to its use of civil agents in other areas of the department. We also found that departments and agencies were satisfied with the quality of lawyers assigned to them, and that the department puts considerable effort into ensuring the quality of the services it provides. However, the department has not defined what it means by quality, does not have an overall quality management system to ensure that it is delivering consistent quality to its client departments, and cannot assess whether it is meeting its overall quality objective. We found that while the Department of Justice Canada was responsive to the needs of government, its financial arrangements with client departments and agencies provided few incentives to control costs and manage the demand for increasing legal services. We found more than 100 financial arrangements in the 8 departments and agencies that we examined. In general, they were inconsistent, poorly documented, and inefficient to administer. The department lacked basic information on its volume of work and the amount of time its staff needed to deliver services required by departments and agencies. As a result, we found that it was not in a position to know whether it was delivering legal services cost effectively. Without good information on costs and time spent on requests, it is difficult to manage and control the growing demand for legal services and to find more efficient ways of providing them.
In this chapter, we mentioned that the department would benefit from having someone in a senior executive position to lead planned improvements. This person could play the role of a chief operating officer, helping to, quote, manage the law practice. I find it encouraging that the department appears to be making progress in addressing our observations and recommendations. In some cases, these improvements were initiated before we tabled our report. While we have not reviewed an action plan since we completed our audit or performed any further review, I understand that the department has improved its financial arrangements for the services provided to departments and agencies. As well, it has organized a number of its corporate functions under the Assistant Deputy Minister for the new management sector. I believe that the department is on the road to making positive changes in the way it manages the delivery of its legal services. The committee may wish to ask the department for further information on its plans for improving the management of its costs and on its plans to introduce a quality management framework. Mr. Chair, thank you. This concludes our opening statement. We would be happy to respond to any questions that committee members may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fraser. Mr. Sims, I understand you have some open comments, and I invite you to present them now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to appear before the members of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts to discuss Chapter 5 of the Auditor General's report on managing the delivery of legal services to the government. Joining me today, as you indicated, Chair, is Yves Cote, Associate Deputy Minister, and Terence McCauley, the Acting Assistant Deputy Manager for the new management sector.
Today I would like to report to the members of the committee on what the Department of Justice has done over the last year and what we continue to do to address the observations and recommendations that the Auditor General presented in her May 2007 report on legal services.
Chairman, the Department of Justice has more than 66,500 active files related to the provision of legal services to government in fiscal year 2006-07. Of these, close to 38,000 were litigation files and more than 25,000 were advisory files. Department lawyers drafted 58 bills that were tabled in Parliament and drafted almost 600 motions to amend bills. So perhaps it is fitting to characterize us as the Auditor General just did as the Canada's largest law firm. Despite constant growth in the demand for legal services, since 2003-2004, the Department's operating expenditures have remained stable, growing at an average rate of 3% annually. In 2005-06, these expenditures represented only about 1% of government spending on operations, excluding grants and contributions and debt service charges.
Mr. Chairman, this leads to a discussion of the state of the Department's management. As Deputy Minister, I believe that the Department overall is doing well. My belief stems in part from the results and feedback from Treasury Board Secretariat in its annual assessment of my Department's management accountability framework.
The Department received positive feedback in 2007 and was commended for its work in improving management in a number of areas. I believe that these results help respond to several observations and recommendations for improvement raised in the audit report. For example, the Secretariat's assessment notes that the Department has made substantial progress in the area of business and corporate planning and made good progress in implementing more robust performance management practices. Je suis satisfait de cette évaluation.
I am satisfied with this assessment, as I believe that it reflects the levels of effort that my department has made over the last years, while at the same time I recognize that more is required.
In addition to the management accountability framework, I consider the Auditor General's report itself, of course, to be an important tool, a tool that helps us ensure that the management practices and departmental operations are sound. Mr. Chairman, providing quality legal services to the government is one of my top priorities as Deputy Minister. I was therefore very pleased to see that the audit report recognizes the Department's strong commitment to providing legal services to the quality legal services to the government, and that the Department puts considerable effort into ensuring the quality of the legal services it provides. I'm also pleased to note that our client government departments and agencies to whom we deliver legal services are satisfied with the quality of counsel assigned to them, as well as with the overall services we provide. We will build on the elements of quality management noted in the report, and in fact work is already underway to develop a more complete quality assurance framework. At the same time, the Auditor General's report made clear that we need to improve in certain areas. For
example, the Department needs to complete its work on improving the management of legal agents. Although we have achieved good results in this area with respect to federal prosecutions, we are looking to implement lessons learned from that initiative to improve the management of civil legal agents.
Working to better support departments and agencies in managing the demand for legal services. While our department can't control this demand, there's work we can and should be doing, as noted in the report, to assist departments and agencies. For example, at the time of the audit, the department was making progress in working with Treasury Board Secretariat to put in place a more consistent approach to managing the department's financial arrangements with departments and agencies, including a cost recovery formula to reflect full cost of legal services. With Treasury Board's approval, on April 1, 2007, a uniform cost recovery approach that is applied to all legal services provided to departments and agencies was implemented across government. As a result, cost recovery arrangements are now more consistent, appropriately documented, and efficient to administer. We've also extended timekeeping to all types of legal services provided to government. As a result, the Department will have more robust information on workload and on the costs of all legal services. Another issue that clearly requires the Department's attention is the provision and use of financial information related to legal services. Our new Law Practice Management Committee has identified this matter as an urgent priority, and the Department is committed to addressing this issue. Work will commence to identify information needs and requirements in partnership with departments and agencies. Mr. Chairman, while I recognize that there's more work that needs to be done, I'm very pleased with the progress the Department has made since the tabling of the Auditor General's report in last May, and I look forward to discussion with this committee. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Sims. We're going to start now with the first round. That round will be 7 minutes each, and we're going to start with Mr. Holland. Mr. Holland, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Fraser, again for coming before committee and to the witnesses. I want to start, if I could, Mr. Sims, with one of the last issues you were talking about, which is the standing agents. And the Auditor General's report found that there have been improvements to the procurement and management of standing agents hired for federal prosecution on an interim basis, but the Auditor General also found that you were unable to provide any kind of formal evaluations or any formal documentation of corrective action for poor performance. And I just want to understand on that basis, what does the Justice Department have in place in terms of procedures to evaluate standing agents that are hired for federal prosecutions? Because in the Auditor General's report, we're sort of left to wonder if there are any. So perhaps you can comment on that to start.
Thank you. I'll address my remarks, if I can, to the management of civil agents, which is now the responsibility of the Department of Justice as opposed to agents from the criminal side. In the last year, we have spent a great deal of effort to put in place a framework that respects open procurement practices for the evaluation and finding and selection of agents, a technique that an approach that accords more with how banks and insurance companies do it, another big consumer of legal services. We make assessments at the front end on hiring such agents or recommending the retaining of such agents. We do not yet have a formal evaluation system in place after the fact for civil agents. However, the nature of the agents that we tend to hire in the civil matters makes this a bit difficult. So I can explain that at greater length if you'd like, but we have taken many steps to improve the overall process for hiring civil agents since the report of the Auditor General.
that a formal evaluation would be important. I understand that it might be difficult. Can you tell us what your plans are to put that into place to ensure that an evaluation does take place, and if you have a timeline of resolving that concern?
Well, we're working on that now. Our priority has been to address first the items that the Auditor General had identified, namely that although we had a fairly robust management system in place for the criminal side, we didn't have anything resembling that on the civil side. So over the past year, we've addressed the front end of that process, how to respect modern procurement principles, how to ensure an open, accessible, fair, transparent process, value for money, and so on. Now it's time to move to the later stages of that process, and that's on our work plan to do. I don't know whether we have actually a time frame formally decided, but it's in the next tranche of work to be done on that side.
Madam Fraser, how essential do you see that? How important? I mean, we're hearing that they don't have a timeline on this. How important do you think that is, and what kind of time frame would you like to see them take action on this? I know that's difficult to answer, but I'd like to get some sense of the importance you attach to this review process.
Obviously, Chair, we believe that the evaluation of the performance, be it for agents that are there for prosecutions or for civil cases, is important. We noted as in the report that there had been a great deal of improvement in the management of the agents for prosecutions, and the department has committed to doing the same thing for the civil agents. But in both cases, the evaluation of performance was lacking, and we note in the report as well that there was no requirement to have a documented evaluation on the files. So we would, of course, like to see in the action plan that there be consideration given to having a formal policy that evaluation should be conducted, and that then there be a reasonable time frame put in place to bring that into practice. But we believe that it is an essential part of ensuring that the services that were rendered were appropriate, that the department was satisfied with the services, and if not, that there be some consequence or some remedial action that's taken afterwards.
I agree, and I think committee would as well. I just want to move on to the issue of alternative dispute resolution. I commend the Department of Justice for incorporating alternative dispute resolution as a method of reducing costly litigation. But unfortunately, in the Auditor General's report, she found that these initiatives lack clear objectives, estimates around potential savings, and also there was no project management structure or even a formal review of the outcomes. And I'm just wondering, in light of those findings, if you can tell us how we can ensure that these alternative dispute resolution initiatives are effective in achieving favorable results for the government. I mean, how are we measuring this, and what plans do you have to begin measuring this on a go-forward basis?
We agree with the Auditor General that it is important to have an evaluation process in place for alternative dispute resolution. It's too easy to talk favorably about ADR without knowing necessarily that it works. So we've taken that recommendation to heart, and we in fact have plans to do a pilot project to do an evaluation of some of the ADR processes that we have been underway now. We are also studying whether a mandatory mediation model could produce some benefits for the government. One form of ADR, of course, and as we study that, we're building in an evaluation component for that as well. So I agree with the question. I agree with the report. We are taking it to heart, and we're starting to design the evaluation programs that need to be done to give us the data so we can measure and see.
Do you have a timeline on that at all, or an idea of when we can expect that kind of analysis to be available?
I don't know the date. I'll get it for you.
Perhaps you can get back to me. Yeah, I only have one last question. Do I have time for another?
one very brief.
Okay, it'll be very brief. The other issue that the Auditor General's report found that gave me a great deal of concern, actually, is that the Department of Justice is not reporting to Parliament the overall costs that are incurred across the government for legal services. And I think this is a concern because it leaves Parliament in a difficult position of not knowing what these costs are. And so I think it's extremely important that we know what your plans are in terms of improving the reporting that is done to Parliament so that we can have a clear understanding of what these costs are, because that's an information gap that causes me a great deal of concern.
I agree that it would be better if such information were available to Canadians and to parliamentarians. We now report fully on all the information that is within our control. Some of the information that I think the question addresses and that the Auditor General's report addresses is not within our control. It's information, it's money spent by departments in support of the on-site legal services that we have at all the departments and agencies across the system. So we agree, though, that this would be good to have that information available, and we stand ready to work with Treasury Board, which I think is probably the agency best placed to ensure that a system-wide system like that can be put in place.
Thank you.
Chez Monsieur Laforêt, 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci.
Mr. Laforêt. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Fraser, in your opening statement, you state that one of the 3 goals of your audit was to ensure that there were quality services being delivered. And later in your opening remarks, you state that the Department of Justice has not defined what quality legal services consist of, and it doesn't have an overall quality management system, and it has no way of assessing whether it has reached its goals of quality or not. So if they do not have that in place, then how can you assess whether they have quality legal services, because that was one of your goals. In the Department of Justice itself, there isn't any monitoring of that. So it must make your task even more difficult. How did you succeed in determining whether or not there were quality services being provided? In any system of professional services, whether they be legal or other, even audit services, one has to define, first of all, what quality consists of. That may include factors such as short delay, short response time to the client, types of decisions and outcomes. There are different ways of determining quality. And in our report, we noted that the Department of Justice that there are several elements to that quality, that it pays attention to quality services. It has an overall quality management system, and that there are processes that exist. It might be, for example, review by superiors or second review, for example. There's the risk evaluation as well of certain files. So there has to be a system that takes into account risk, a level of monitoring, and there also has to be a system, another system, to make sure that that system works. Well then, if that is lacking, can you state that quality services are being rendered then by the department? Well, we had interviews with clients, and they indicated to us that they were satisfied with the services, and we looked at the factors that make up a system. But what we pointed out was that there has to be an overall system, and the department agreed with us and is working on achieving that. And there has to be consistency as well, given the scope and the size of that department. Thank you. Mr. Sims. In the report, there were recommendations, and to each recommendation you said you support those recommendations. A year has gone by. A year will have gone by in a month. I'd like to know what stage you're at now. You supported the recommendations, and therefore I'd like to know how far along you are in terms of ensuring quality services and appointing appointing someone to that financial position. I'd like to know if you've done that. Because often people will come and tell us, well, they support the recommendations, and then nothing happens 5 years down the road. So I'd like to know how quickly you're moving along. We'll definitely be moving faster than that. I'm going to attempt to respond to you in French using my English notes. So I apologize for any mistakes that I may make. Now, we've made a lot of progress since the report was tabled. We have improved our strategic planning, and we've improved the integration of operational with strategic plans. We have also achieved considerable progress in the hiring of standing civil agents and the alternative dispute resolution. As I started saying to Mr. Murphy, we established pilot projects to evaluate the effectiveness of these projects. With respect to reporting to Parliament, we have integrated the DPR and the RPP. So now they are much more closely integrated than they were before. We have created a separate sector to oversee the management of the department, and they bring together elements that had been spread across the department. Mr. Terry McCauley is the acting leader of that sector, manager of that sector, and we have also established a Law Practices Management Committee, which is a group that did not exist previously and that is responsible for managing the delivery of these legal services. In the report, it's often pointed out that the weaknesses lie in an overall system for these services. So this group started analyzing the quality framework that was necessary for ensuring the delivery of these quality legal services, and also that was responsible for defining quality. Now, in terms of risk management, that is progressing very well. In the area of litigation, we've made less progress. Perhaps I could just ask you another question, because the time is going by. So I understand what you're saying. But I'd like to come back to the issue of civil agents. It was pointed out that usually for litigation, the grounds or the reasons that are given for dealing with agents outside the Department of Justice is that there are no lawyers who have that expertise within the department. That's often the reason that's given. So I believe there were 3 out of 21 cases, or there were 3 regions in Canada, rather, that were focused on. I think I read that in your report. Does that mean that the same is happening in other regions or not? And I'd also like to know if you looked at how many lawyers who do have that expertise exist in the department, and so that in the future perhaps lawyers can be used from within the department rather than dealing with agents outside the department, and that you have the expertise you need within the department, or at least you can free that up. I don't think it's so much a question of whether or not we have counsel in the department that has that expertise for 80% of what we do. However, sometimes there is an issue that doesn't necessarily fall within the public service. It may be, for example, a trade or commercial issue. And that happens rarely. So in cases like those exceptional cases, then we would hire an agent from the outside. But that is not the normal practice. Or sometimes there may be a case or a conflict. We may have the expertise we need within the department, but there may be a conflict, and to avoid those conflicts, we then deal with outside agents. But if we start hiring agents too frequently, well, then we need to ask ourselves whether or not we should be building that capacity within the department. And if there are grounds to do that, we do that. I would say that we're talking about 1%. That is, say, those times when we need to deal with an outside agent. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Laforêt. Mr. William.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to our guests. And Mr. Sims, we've talked about quality, and we've talked about the issues that have been raised by the Auditor General, and one of the things I'm thinking here about are standards. And back in 1993, I think it was, in 1993, the last audit, for example, the lack of management information, I'm here talking about 5.64 on the Auditor General's report. In 1993, you agreed to bring in time management for the lawyers, and you finally got it going by 2006. 13 years to move on a fairly simple administrative program that lawyers will keep timesheets so they can charge their clients for the work that they're doing. 13 years. How long, Mr. Sims, before we get the department working properly?
Mr. Williams, the 13 years is a long time.
I know it's a long time.
But I think, as I started to indicate in the answer to one of the previous questions, we have moved very rapidly to implement or plan to implement the recommendations of the last audit. The question was, departments always say in the audit report, we agree and we'll do something about it. We're actually doing something about it. We've taken many active steps to address the issues that Mrs. Fraser has raised, and so I think that we're not going to be taking an undue time to implement the remaining outstanding matters.
So if I go to 5.57 on the AG's report, we're here talking about you're trying to do something, and you actually drafted some standards with client departments that you could actually interact with the departments, but they hadn't been implemented. So you actually went through the exercise, but you didn't implement the standards that you'd agreed and negotiated with the departments. Why?
5.57?
5.57. In the middle of the paragraph, she says here, some standards at the time of the audit, and this was, I think, the 1993, establishing service standards has been a work in progress since the 1993 audit. Again, another 13-year work in progress. At that time, 1993, we found that not all of the portfolios, regions, and branches had service standards in place. Some standards were drafted with client departments but had not been implemented. So is this just another legal work to keep the lawyers busy so they don't have to do anything?
No. I think part of the challenge in the management of the Department of Justice and in this area is that we work with a number of different clients. We see this issue.
But all lawyers deal with different clients.
And we have service standards. We've had service standards, and we've had financial arrangements which have been developed in different pockets historically over time. One of the big challenges that's been identified, I think, in the Auditor General's report is to get global standards, uniform standards, national standards, and that's where the focus is now. So that's what we're bent on getting done in the next short period of time.
Is that 13 years?
No.
Okay. 5.56 of the Auditor General's report. She says that they found isolated instances where clients received more than one opinion on the same issue from different Justice Canada lawyers. And then it goes on to say departmental officials had expected and wanted a single national opinion from Justice Canada, and we're also told of one instance where differing positions were played out in front of a client who then had to act as a conciliator of deciding, well, do I go this way or that way? I've got two legal opinions, one says black, one says white. Surely he asked the lawyers for the legal position, not a bunch of legal positions so they can choose where to go.
I think what the report says as well is that these are rare, isolated instances. As I indicated in my opening statement, we have a huge volume, 66,500 files active. We deliver services all over the country. We appear in court approximately 50 times a day nationally. And we have 2,500 lawyers servicing the vast machine of government. And most of the time, almost all of the time, we don't have inconsistencies.
But
Lawyers disagree sometimes, but we have mechanisms to identify the disagreement and find a way to reconcile the different points of view and ensure that different parts of government and different interests are brought to bear in reaching a single point of view. So,
but I think about the gun registry. You may recall that situation where the department had overspent money that had not been appropriated by Parliament, and they found themselves in a bit of a pickle, and they asked for a legal opinion, and the legal opinion was quite short and sweet, saying, hey, you've broken the law, you better get it fixed. And they said, well, gee, this is politically embarrassing. So they got another convoluted, long, twisted, splitting hairs 10 times to come up with a decision that says, oh, it's okay. It's perfectly legitimate to ignore Parliament and spend money that Parliament hasn't been appropriated. So does the lawyers provide the advice that the clients want, or do you actually provide legal advice?
I think I'd give the same answer, that the example you're pointing to, happily, is an exceedingly rare example. We have
How often does it happen, though?
I only know of isolated instances.
1, 3, 10, 20?
I think the Auditor General's report talks of 2. I don't know. I know of, it happens all the time, that colleagues disagree at the beginning, end of the analysis of a file. But at the end of the day, I don't know of examples today beyond the ones identified by Ms. Fraser of contradictory advice. So, and in fact,
But
I'm
no,
not sure. I'm not sure.
This was not contradictory advice. The department just didn't like the advice that they got.
I was going to say, as a matter of fact, I was going to contradict myself. I don't think, in fact, from memory, that the advice in the firearms matter was contradictory. The 2 lawyers were asked for advice on consecutive days and gave answered slightly different questions, and it wasn't caught in time that there was the 2 people being asked to give advice at the same time.
I have to disagree with that, Mr. Chairman, because it was quite clear, and you, I'm sure, will recall we dealt with this fairly intensively at committee, where there was a single, short, clear, concise, definitive opinion that said the law had been broken and Parliament, money had been spent that was not appropriated by Parliament. And subsequent to that, and certainly not the next day, there was another opinion that was long, it was convoluted, it was tortuous, and to say, if you looked at it from this perspective, that perspective, turn it upside down, twist it around, you could actually justify the position. Now, this was a clear case of the department providing an opinion that the department wanted, rather than a legal opinion. And this is what I want to know. How often does this happen?
Mr. Williams. Mr. Christopherson, 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you all for coming today and another fine report, Auditor General. Let me just, if I can, take one quick moment to do, lawyers in the public realm are often not seen, notwithstanding the law clerk's current notoriety these days. But for the most part, they really are not seen except by the politicians. And I've been fortunate enough to serve at 4 different orders of government: city, regional, provincial, and now federal. And I got to tell you, for the overwhelming most part, especially someone with an extreme deficit in a formal education, I need lawyers more than most of my elected colleagues, and I need them to make sense in a way that I can understand and then use it. And I got to tell you, Chair, again, the overwhelming most part, people who dedicate themselves, it's like doctors who go into public health, lawyers that choose to go into public service as opposed to, going out to find out how many millions they can squirrel away before they leave this place. And so I just want to thank all the lawyers who make those decisions, because without them, quite frankly, nothing could happen. And the more role that a country plays in the world, the more you need to have a respected legal foundation. It comes into play more and more, and I'm learning that the more that I'm here, and I just felt compelled to put on the record that for the most part, the unseen lawyers do a phenomenal job for the Canadian people at all orders of government, and we thank you for that. Now, however, having said that, I'm one of those, and the committee, for the most part, does too, that takes great exception and has a lot of difficulty with audits that are done in the past, and then we have another audit and yet another audit, and we're seeing the same problems over and over. Drives us crazy. because there's really no excuse once it's already been identified and some deputy someday has said, yes, we agree and we'll do it, and then nothing happens. So right here on page 3, and we've touched on some of this, I want to revisit it a bit. Quote, much of what we found, this is the Auditor General, much of what we found had been identified in our 1993 audit as weaknesses, meaning what they found in this audit was similar to what they'd found in the 93, and my good friend Mr. Williams has already been referencing that. Give me quick 2 or 3 points on that, Auditor General. What are the 3 things that stand out in your mind that are still unresolved that were there in 93?
If I could, Chair, I think to be fair, we have to point out that the Department has made progress on a number of issues.
Yep.
And the second sentence notes managing legal risk, managing legal agents, which I know is not an easy thing to do, and they began to introduce timekeeping. So I think we do have to give them credit for work that has been done. I would say the 2 main areas that we believe where improvements are needed is information systems on workload and human resources, and financial arrangements with client departments. Those are 2 issues that were present in 93 and have still not been resolved.
Did you hear an adequate explanation as to why not, or just it didn't happen?
I think in part, certainly the financial arrangements, I think as the Deputy has mentioned, is in part due to the complexity and the size of the department and the fact that most of this is decentralized as well. So to bring in the uniformity across the department is a challenge and does take time. And department-wide information on workload and human resources, I mean, goes back again to the whole issue of timekeeping and better information systems, which I think we've seen from other audits is not unique to this department. But we certainly do sense that the department is committed and has begun to take action on many of these. So we are, I guess we could say, cautiously optimistic that the follow-up audit, if it were to be done, would be positive.
Good. Thank you. And Deputy, you know, this question's coming. What assurance do we have from you now that's going to make a difference from the assurances that were given by a deputy then?
Speaking for me and what we're doing now, we are determined to address the questions that the Auditor General has raised. The whole management of the public sector is, I think, more rigorous and vigorous than it has been in the past. It's in our self-interest to get these systems right and to be able to generate the information and the data so that we can tell our story. We have a good story to tell, we think, and we'd like to be able to tell it effectively by recourse to the data and information that will allow us to do that. And we want to manage properly. We have enormous challenges that we can't face effectively with systems that let us down. So it's in our interest as well as for any other reason to give this a priority, and that's what we're doing.
Thank you. This is about the point where I would really hone in on it and go for broke, but I got to tell you, a lot of the problems are being addressed, notwithstanding some of the concerns around 93. So, Deputy, here's what I want to do. Would you just, I only have a few moments left, but would you just quickly point out what is the stages of the process? Your department gets a phone call from somewhere, another ministry, another department, and what are the main steps that happen? And if you would, and this is where I'm going to call on your talents, identify for me, obviously you would be honest, but as frank a way as you can, where there were criticisms in that step, and then what you're doing to correct it, so that I can end my few moments with you, knowing that the whole thing has been thought through and that you've identified the key areas, not only just in a good report, but just in a practical, common sense, everyday sort of way. If you would, please, Deputy.
And so just to understand your question, you're picturing where a client calls the Department of Justice and wants...
Yeah, for us and for anybody who's watching on TV, exactly what is the process? You get a call, we need legal help, and then what are the key steps, without going into any great detail, and where in those steps have you been less than ideally effective, and where the Auditor General's made recommendations and you're going to act on it?
So a client speaks to one of our lawyers, probably a lawyer who is co-located with the client in one of the departmental legal services units. Let's imagine that that's at fisheries. Phones, because it's a lawyer, this person, the client, has a lot of dealings with. The first thing the lawyer will do will be to try to identify with the client what are the legal questions that this raises. Chances are high in the Government of Canada that the issues will touch more than just the Department of Fisheries. It may well touch Indian and Northern Affairs, for example, if it's about a shared fishery involving Aboriginal fishers and so on. There may be constitutional issues. So the lawyer at the first instance will try to figure out what are all of the legal issues that are raised and ensure that all the parts of the Department of Justice which ought to be brought to bear have a chance to feed into the analysis of this question, and by the same token make sure that other affected and touched client departments are also made aware that this issue is arising and they have a chance to come in. One of the issues that the Auditor General says in her report is that what we have not done in the past is, at an early stage in this process, sit down with the client to say, okay, we can now ballpark it's going to take so many hours to get this piece of work done, and we estimate it's going to cost so much money for us to continue to do this work, and have a conversation about whether the department, the client, wants the work to continue, or whether, knowing that that's the cost, that they might make a decision not to go ahead with it at this time. Much of the work we do, of course, is not discretionary. Much of the work that the government faces are legal issues that arrive on their doorstep. They didn't go looking for them, so they may have no choice but to proceed. But we haven't done in the past, in many cases, that kind of conversation unless the file is really big. If the issue is enormous, we have had those conversations. But for smaller kinds of files, we have not done that. I guess we've developed tools which are referred to in the audit report, in particular the legal risk management as an approach for analyzing the degree of risk in the issue that's been brought to the attention of the lawyer. So we would assess whether a bad outcome is likely to occur, and if that bad outcome does occur, precisely how bad will it be, depending on for the Government of Canada. So there's a problem, but it's almost certainly not going to happen, and if it does, it's minor anyway. If you make that assessment early on, you're not going to spend much time on the file. If it is for sure it's going to happen, and there's going to be a big, bad, adverse outcome for the government, then you'll spend a lot of attention on the file, and you'll make sure that more resources are devoted to the management of that issue. So that kind of analysis is made at the same time.
Okay, Mr. Sims, we're going to go to the next questioner. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Christopherson. Mr. Jesniski, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Sims, I understand your department's budget is approximately $1 billion. Is that correct?
It was $1 billion at the time of the audit, but since then the Office of the Prosecution Service of Canada has left, and so taking with them money, and so the budget is closer to $600 million.
Mm-hmm. Now, between the period of 98 and 2005, the report notes that your operating expenses basically doubled. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Madame Fraser, will you be aware of any other major government department that during that same time frame that their operating expenses would have doubled? Or is this a one-off?
I'm sorry, Chair, I don't have that kind of information.
But I think most likely in this committee it would come to our attention. In fact, if all government departments during that period, 98-2005, if all major departments' budgets, operating expenses had doubled, most likely we'd be rocking the fiscal foundations of the country. So I find it quite strange that this particular department would have a doubling of its expenses. Have we seen that in any other sectors? Have we seen it in the, Mr. Sims, have we seen a doubling of budgets in your provincial counterparts departments? Have we seen it in the corporate sector? Or is this just specific and unique to the Department of Justice federally?
I don't have that information. I have some information from other sectors that goes to a recognition that the nature of legal problems in the last period of time has increased in complexity tremendously, that certain court processes now take more time and court days than they used to, and so on. There's data like that out there.
So your explanation seems to be that society's become more litigious during the last 7 years, but I note in the actual report there are other issues raised, just simple accounting issues such as substandard timekeeping of your lawyers. Are those sorts of issues now being addressed? And also, is it a reflection perhaps of ineffectual alternative dispute resolution? There were some questions as to the effectiveness of those processes. So is it just because everyone's more litigious, or is it because of lack of controls within your department?
I think you ask a really interesting question, and I don't think I've got a complete answer. I'm not sure if anybody does. First of all, it's important to recognize that we respond to demands for service. So we are getting bigger, or we're getting bigger. We're not now. We were getting bigger at a time in response to increased demand by the departments that run programs that were suddenly attracting a lot of legal issues. So for the classic example, I suppose, would be at Indian and Northern Affairs during the period when there were 13 or 15,000 cases of coming out of the Indian residential schools. That created a bubble of work, an enormous amount of work, both by INAC and by the Department of Justice to try to deal fairly and expeditiously with those cases. We've seen the whole phenomenon of class actions growing in recent times, which is a factor that affects society as a whole. We had only a handful some years ago. They were virtually unknown, and now we have, I forget, 150 class actions, I believe, against the federal government. By their nature, they are very, very time-consuming. There have been a number of public inquiries, which you would know about very well, and public inquiries have a way of demanding a great deal of attention from the Department of Justice. But the Auditor General makes a point, which I think is we really have to understand well and try to think through, and that is, can we design incentives on the departments that give us the work or ask for our services to make them or help them together find ways to control the demand. I don't create the demand, they do. Can I help them find an incentive mechanism that will hold this down?
Mr. Sims, unfortunately in this committee we are under a time clock, so if I could move on. You just said that by their nature a lot of these demands are quite time-consuming, and the Auditor General raised the serious issue of timekeeping of the services, and there doesn't seem to be adequate controllership over that. I'd be curious to know what has been done. And over the last couple of years, departments have had controllers come into their departments. Do you now have a controller within your department, and is he addressing the aspect of controlling costs before we even get into the secondary aspect of this is finding or providing incentives to control costs? Is there a controller? Has he looked at the issue of timekeeping?
I'm just checking. I'm asking my colleague, Mr. McCauley, for the term of the officer that we have responsible for such matters in the Department of Justice, and I'll ask for that title in a moment. We have timekeeping now. And
since when?
Since 1970, December 76. When did we get timekeeping? I'll get that date for you in just a minute. Get that date for you in just a minute. We've had timekeeping for the last short period of time. This will allow us to build information on how much money is being spent on different classes of file. We'll be able to do trend analysis with clients. That data is accumulating now. And so we can sit down with clients to say, we detect that there's a certain class of issue, a certain kind of case which is costing you so much money. Do you want to continue to deal with it in this way, or would you like to find some other way to handle it? Maybe the legislation out of which the disputes arise, which generate all the work, could be amended. There are things that we can do in which the tools with legal risk management already allow us to use to find ways to control the demand. What's the name of the official? The officer, of course, would be the Chief Financial Officer, and we've had timekeeping since December, full timekeeping since December.
No controller in place at the present time. As a deputy minister, I would assume that, especially in a department that's doubled its operating expenses, you'd be aware if a controller had been put into place in the department. So is there a controller, or is there not?
Yes, there is. I'm sorry if my answer seemed confusing. It's not called a controller. It's the Chief Financial Officer. We, of course, have a Chief Financial Officer. And timekeeping has been in since December 2006.
Mr. Sweet, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to go back to a question that Mr. Holland raised, and because your answer about reporting to Parliament was that individual departments have their own expenses for legal services, and I was looking through this report, and I was under the impression that you actually build other departments for the services that you provide. Is that correct? And if you do, then why is it impossible for you to aggregate all those numbers and put out a report?
The lawyers who provide the legal services to departments and who are co-located with them work for the Department of Justice, and I have their data, and I report it now to the department, to Parliament. But some of the costs which are related to the full delivery of service would include the cost of accommodation, in some instances the cost of support staff, computer equipment, and that kind of thing. Those kinds of costs are typically provided by the department. We supply the lawyers. They supply these other costs, and those other costs that I don't have access to from the Department of Justice. Okay, so now you also mentioned in your answer that you had been talking to the Treasury Board, and you're saying, and it's your understanding there are plans to for the Treasury Board to, because they have access to those numbers, to have an aggregate report. Is that correct? I'm saying that I think this is something that we should be discussing with Treasury Board to ensure that it is addressed. Okay. On page 9, and actually there's a number of occasions throughout the report where the Auditor General refers to human resources, and also so page 9, page 17, 5.45, 5.46, and we have a corporation in Hamilton called DeFasco, and they have this ad that they run that said steel is our product, but our strength is our people. And it's a nice little jingle, but it makes the point that if you're not training consistently and you don't have any aspect of monitoring the competencies of your staff, 2,500 has been mentioned of the legal staff in your department, how can you possibly meet the challenges that you're going to have to face in the future? As Mr. Wisniewski said, we're continually getting into an increasing environment of litigiousness, and so I'm wondering, have you addressed that concern, and what are you doing to make sure that all of your staff are getting the minimum amount of training that they need? We've had, and I think the Auditor General's report mentions it, we've had a policy for some time that all professional staff must spend 5 days training. But what we have not had is a software program, some way of keeping track of whether in fact that's actually taking place. We've also had recently individual learning plans, which we've had in the department for a while, in which the clerk has been strongly urging all departments to adopt as well, which calls for a conversation between each professional and his or her manager each year, in which they discuss training needs. It's basically a bargain is struck that the manager agrees that this employee needs this kind of development, which will have this kind of cost, and they agree that that's going to take place. That's been going on for some time at an individual level. What we've been missing is the tool that the Auditor General correctly points out we're lacking, which is, can we push a button at the center of the department to make sure that it's happening as it should? We're working on that now. We're testing a software program that will allow us to keep track of it. But we take training very seriously. We do a lot of it. The other thing I should quickly add is, as a result of a change in the costing formula for the delivery of legal services, we now have built in an element which is for training. And so part of the hourly rate for each lawyer now includes an amount for training, which means we're going to be assured of a proper fund to make sure that all people get the training they need.
Could you give me an idea, because, you know, again, time has been a concern here, and you're saying you're working on it. So you're talking about an enforcement mechanism to make sure that the staff get the minimum amount of training. When is that going to be completed?
I don't have that at my fingertips. Perhaps as the questioning goes on, one of my colleagues can give me the date, and I'll give it back to you.
On page 25, 5.81, 5.85, there's a talk, and it was been discussed a little bit here, variable arrangements from department to department. There's a whole slew of them, 100 for goodness sake. What work has been done to pare that down specifically, and is your end goal to make sure that there is one standard from department to department, barring, of course, the fact that there may be some significant, how would I say, idiosyncrasies of one specific department where you have to modify it a bit?
There's two parts to your question, I think. One is, why do we have so many agreements? And then the second part is, why do we have different agreements? We have a large number of agreements in some cases because we respond to the accountability requirements of the client with whom we're dealing. So some clients that we work with have a very decentralized way of doing business, and they didn't want us to have one macro agreement with the entire department. They wanted us to enter into agreements with each of the major units that make up that department. So we responded to their request of us in that fashion. We, of course, we would like nothing better than to have these reduced to a more sensible number than 100, whatever the figure was in the report, which seems excessive. But the other problem that we're working on is we've also had different clauses, and that's partly because historically we sat down and lawyers would respond to the individual needs of each client and work out something that was tailored to their needs. But when you try to roll it up, of course, you have a wide variety, and that's not efficient and effective, and we're trying to reduce that. So one of the major projects that the new Law Practice Management Division is working on are uniform agreements that we can roll out, so we won't be into the business of negotiating a wide variety of different clauses every year.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sweet. Thank you, Mr. Sims. That, colleagues, concludes the first round. What I propose we do is to adjourn the meeting at approximately 12:45. There is a couple of items, committee business I want to deal with in camera. And we're going to go to the second round now, and we're going to have 3-minute rounds. Before we do that, I have a question to you, Mr. McCauley, and this deals with the whole issue of appointment of outside standing agents and contract civil agents on a case-by-case basis. And as the Auditor General reported in her report, that there's no documented rationale for the selection of these agents. Now, as a lawyer that was in the street for 25 years, there was a very clear rationale back when I was out there, and that was called patronage. And both successive Liberal and Conservative governments were shameless in the way these agents were picked. And please don't say it wasn't done that way, because everyone watching TV knows that it was done that way. It really had little to do with the ability or the quality of legal services. It mainly had to deal with the affinity of the party in power and how close you were to the existing political minister. And when a government changed, these legal agents would change automatically. In fact, in the middle of a case, one old lawyer in the community that I come from described it best. He said, when the gravy train stops, not a drop spills over. And I think that clarified the whole issue. So my question to you, Mr. McCauley, perhaps could you describe what the role is now of the political minister in the province? Do you get lists? Do you communicate with, or your department, communicate with the politicians involved? It's not all the MPs, but it would be the political minister, and to the choosing of these lists and the selection of these agencies. Could you describe the system?
Perhaps if I could begin by explaining the new process, and then I'll turn the final part of the question over to the Deputy. However, what we've done now is attempted to create pools of individual lawyers. So we have gone out into the legal community and we've asked the legal community to express an interest to participate with us. And with that in mind, we now create pools of candidates with various expertise that we can go to. So as a legal issue comes into the office, and it is one of those rare instances where we do use counsel from an outside source, we look then to that pool in terms of choosing the candidate that will proceed with the legal issue that's before us. And so that begins the process. So it creates a neutral field of putting the best legal mind to the issue at hand. And so perhaps then I can turn it over to the Deputy to speak to the second part.
Mr. McCauley, are you saying that the political ministers have nothing whatsoever to do anymore? Is that your evidence before the committee?
The minister does make the final decision, yes. Okay. So we push the matter to the minister.
That clarifies it. Yeah. Thank you very much. I think that does clarify a lot of the... I think I got an answer to my question, but if you want to elaborate, Mr. Sims.
Yes, I just would like to say that in fact, at the level that Mr. McCauley was describing, in the expression of interest in the establishment of the initial pool, which is between 300 and 350 lawyers, that's done by officials of the Department of Justice. We invited firms all across the country to express an interest, and in the assessment of the qualifications of the lawyers required for these rare cases where agents are hired, that assessment is done by justice lawyers who make a recommendation to the minister. We think it's appropriate that the minister at the end of the day makes the decision, because there's a subjective element to choosing a lawyer. He has to have confidence that the lawyers who will represent him personally in courts have the required qualifications. But that whole pool has been generated by the outsiders expressing an interest, justice officials doing the vetting, and then the list is from that list a recommendation is made to the minister.
Okay, I think the point has been clarified. Okay, we'll go to the second round. It has been brought to my attention we may have time for 4 minutes. We'll see how we get along, but I'm going to be brutal with the time, and I will interrupt. Mr. Hubbard, you have 4 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And when we talk about 2,500 lawyers, you mean there are 2,500 full-time lawyers working within the department, Mr. Sims? Is that correct?
Yes, I can. It's approximately right. I can get the exact figure, but that's about right.
But in terms of the questions that were asked about us being a big legal firm, like most legal firms you deal with have costs associated with each lawyer. In other words, if I were to call a lawyer, and depending upon the quality and the experience that the law firm had for my case, each of those lawyers would have an hourly rate. Now, has your department considered an hourly rate when you call Mr. Cote? Does it cost me $400 an hour to talk to him, or maybe $1,000 an hour if he's had a lot of experience. Is that an avenue that you've looked at in terms of costing to departments?
Yes, we have an hourly rate, and it varies by the seniority of the lawyers involved. The rate was, we arrive at this rate in conjunction with the Treasury Board, and it's adjusted annually. But we've had, and we've adjusted the formula for this hourly rate recently, but we definitely have an hourly rate.
With providing legislative services to government, of the 2,500 lawyers, how many are directly involved? We have bills come to the House every week nearly, and they come from your department. Like, are there 200 lawyers working on legislation?
My colleague is looking in the RPP now to see if we can find that figure quickly. If we can't, I'll get it for you, sir.
Now, one of the big costs that seems to be spoken about in terms of your statements today is the cost involved with legislation that needs to be judged. The Charter, for example, has been a big cost to your department since it was started. Now, with bills that are come to us as parliamentarians, we have had considerable concerns with some bills. For example, C2 was done, I think, quite hurriedly. A very complex bill, and when your legal group present that to Parliament, are you satisfied that it's good legislation, the best legislation, legislation that will be held up in the court of law, or are you creating some legislation that would present great problems and great costs to our departments in the future? C10 is another one that we are concerned about. Fisheries legislation. We referred here a few minutes ago to the Fisheries Department and the fact that a new bill is being presented to Parliament. In fact, it's there and probably going to committee at second reading. As lawyers and as presenting for legislation, and I go back to C2 in particular, you know, you must have had great efforts to present C2 to Parliament as quickly as it came. Very complex legislation. Eventually did get through. It was held up for a time in the Senate where they did want it, and as was C10. But are we guaranteed as parliamentarians that you as a department have not only done your work but also probably consulted some outside legal opinions, that the legislation you come is as perfect as possible in terms of what our country needs within this justice system?
That's a really interesting question, and I'd like to answer it in parts. First of all, every bill that the Government of Canada tables, we must certify that it is constitutionally sound before it proceeds, or which actually we certify if it's not. So there isn't a bill that the government side tables which has not been analyzed by Department of Justice lawyers to ensure compliance with constitutional principles and charter principles. Whether it is the policy that that Canada needs, of course, is a question. The policy content comes from the government, not from the lawyers analyzing the legality, the constitutionality of the proposal. I don't want to talk about C2 or C10, but if we imagine a hypothetical, it frequently happens that a department sits down with its lawyers and says, we want to go north. And the lawyers would say, constitutionally, that's a problem. I can get you northeast if you modify your travel plans a little bit, and if you're prepared to take a train instead of a plane, I can get you northeast. You have that conversation all the time. So it's a dynamic dialogue between the lawyers giving advice, doing a legal risk analysis, helping the policy center try to achieve its goals for the greater good of Canada. So that's the process. I'm being given data on the number of lawyers. There are 2,000 lawyers, in the Department of Justice at the moment. About 500 of them work on policy and programs and management, and we think it's about 125 lawyers doing legislative drafting, but I'll confirm that number for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hubbard. Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. Fitzpatrick, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I want to focus on billable hours and the hourly rates with the private agents or the civil agents. Being Irish and being a lawyer and being a politician, I belong to, I think, the 3 groups that are still open for humor in this day and age. And there was an old story about a lawyer that had passed on who was at the pearly gates, and St. Peter asked him how old he was, and he said, I'm 75 years of age. And Peter looked at his book. He said, there must be some mistake here. I've got you down for 100 years on billable hours. And something that, if there is a weakness in government, it's always that clients or people are spending other people's money. I practiced law for 25 years, and you have to get into your client's wallet to get your money. It's a different parameter than when you send the bill to somebody else to pay for your time and effort. I guess really what I'm getting at is, what kind of controls or system do you have in place to put some, I think it's fairly obvious to me, some controls on the billable hours and the hourly rates that lawyers charge. I know lawyers would all like to charge $1,000 an hour if they could, but let's get real.
There are 2 hourly rates that we're talking about.
What are those rates, just for curiosity?
I'm sorry, I can't tell you the internal justice rates, but I'd be pleased to send you the chart that shows the hourly rates for the different levels of justice lawyers recently adjusted.
Okay.
On the outside agent side, we negotiate rates on behalf of the government with outside agents. And for years, we have successfully retained the top flight litigators in Canada at a very low hourly rate compared to what they would ordinarily charge their clients in the private sector. Very, very favorable. As a result of the work we've been doing following the Auditor General's report for over the last year to put in place these new procurement practices and more rigorous procurement practices and so on, where we've been trying to use market competition techniques as best as possible to ensure that we're getting a competitive look at the lawyers prepared to work for the Department of Justice. We're again getting very good rates.
I want to pursue one area too. It's the auditor's recommendation about total quality management system in place. Having practiced, like those systems by and large are focused on the product or the services delivered to an ultimate customer, and it's meeting and exceeding their expectations, if I understand it, and you have a system that tries to do that. In the practice of law, it seems to me it's giving advice and then getting the results that were identified in your advice. It basically boils down to something as simple as that, and that really gets into measuring performance by individuals. Like there are people that consistently give advice and you get the results that you get from that advice. What would you think would be the main ingredients of a total quality management system for outcomes for legal services? Other than, I assume winning is top of the list. You don't want it losing being your number one goal.
We can have a brief answer, Mr. Sims.
Yeah. I think the issue that I take most to heart from the Auditor General's report is, she says we have many elements of high quality assurance now. What we haven't had is a system to ensure, to guarantee that we're getting the quality we need in every case. We have many, many elements of high quality now. We have peer review, for example, of the litigation that goes to senior courts, which is the best way to judge whether the legal advice and the stance we're adopting is accurate, is correct, is wise. We use legal risk management techniques, which we discussed earlier, to analyze the risks and the advantages. But what we've lacked is an entire framework. That's what we're trying to put in place now. now, and the Law Practice Management Division is helping us to have that overall framework that will tie it all together. And we need to pay attention to the point that the Auditor General refers to, which is we haven't defined quality. So we think we recognize it when we see it, but we haven't defined it, and we should do that because we think it will help, and that's what we're working on.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzpatrick. Thank you, Mr. Sims. Monsieur Lucier, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Fraser, in paragraph 4 of your opening remarks, you mentioned 3 primary areas. I'd like to speak about the third, which was to determine whether legal services were being provided in a cost-effective manner. You state in paragraph 8 that the determinant lacked basic information. And I'd like to know which parameters you think should be used to determine the cost-effectiveness of the department. And I'd like to know if the department could have made its arrangements with other departments more cost-effective. I think any assessment has to look at timekeeping in order to know how they're spending that time. And given that that system did not exist throughout the department, they did not have the information that we needed to see on management of resources, including the cost of time. So it's important, as the Deputy Minister already pointed out, to conduct an analysis to see what the trends are and to look at what types of services are most costly and how those services could be made less costly, how those services could become more cost-effective, or whether that trend exists in only one type of case, or if there are any changes in legislation that are required. So that type of analysis needs to be done in order to properly manage the department. And at the very basis, they did not have the data required on the use of time and the cost of the project, so it was difficult to assess this. Mr. Sims, it says in the report that in 2005, the budget for the department was about $500 million. And in the documents that we have today, we see the figure of $1 billion. So I'd like you to tell me what the breakdown of that $1 billion is over those 2,500 lawyers, and where those 100 arrangements with other departments factor in. I didn't understand the last part of your question. There were 100 financial arrangements with other departments, and I'd like to know whether that is a factor in the $1 billion, whether that is accounted for in the $1 billion. Well, in terms of the amount spent on agents, the cost was reduced by $30 million per year to $25 million. So it went from 30 to 25. So out of the 600, 700, $25 million was spent on those civil agents. Now, in terms of the breakdown amongst the parts of the department, that would be in the RPP. Well, I could attempt an answer at that, if I may. So there's a $1 billion budget, and earlier we stated the prosecution services had left the Justice Department, so that was about $250 million that left. There was also a significant amount in the votes that went into subsidies and contributions. That's an annual amount of about $330 million, and what's left in operational cost is approximately $575 million. And what about the arrangements you have with other departments then? Is that extra funds? Well, as of this year, those amounts that come from other departments are included in our annual estimates then, because we have arrangements with them that fund various projects. So those funds actually become part of those amounts that we account for, that we spend. Thank you, Mr. Lucier.
Yeah, I want to follow up, if I could, on Mr. Sweet's line of questioning regarding what gets charged to departments versus what gets charged to justice. Now, you were talking about departments paying for related costs like accommodation and support staff and computers. I'm just curious, though, when you were referring to costs for access to lawyers, can you clarify, are some of those costs also paid for by departments?
Yes, in some instances they would pay for agents. They would be paying for some of that 25 to $30 million that is being spent on agents.
25 or $30 million spent on agents. So you can say then that on top of the justice budget, there's 25 or $30 million only spent on lawyers on top of what's within the justice budget? Or is there more than that?
I'm sorry, the last part of your question, I'm sorry.
In terms of what's actually spent on lawyers by departments or by anybody within government, there's a certain amount that falls, obviously most of it would fall within the Justice Department budget. What amount of money would the federal government spend on lawyers that doesn't fall within the justice budget?
I guess I don't know. I'll try to find out for you. I think we
know.
know.
No, but that's the point. I guess that's the point that you should be able to tell us that, because from my understanding, you would know when your lawyers are being used. And I think that's the crux of the matter. I think for us, I mean, any of us would expect that if any department would have a systematic approach to these things, it would be a department filled with lawyers, I would think. Maybe I'm assuming too much. I mean, when you come before our committee and we hear that your expenses have doubled between 1998 to 2005, we should be able to get a precise accounting for that. We would expect to get a precise accounting for where that came from, not sort of a general, well, you know, we're a more litigious society. That really doesn't cut it. We would expect more accounting for that.
Let me try it this way. We know exactly how much money is spent on lawyers in the Department of Justice. I think we know exactly how much money is spent on agents, and we know that because it's the Minister of Justice and the Department of Justice that retains every agent, even if it's being done on behalf of another department, and we see all the bills that come in. Every year there is an ATIP request in which they ask the department what's the total amount of money spent on agents, and we know, and that money, but where that actually appears in the accounts for Parliament, I don't know as I'm sitting here right now. I'll find out for you, but we know exactly how much money is being spent on justice lawyers and on legal agents. We know that, and it's 25 to $30 million, and it's the $600 million in the RPP this year.
So it's $630 million in total.
Now, if we're now making a difference between lawyers and other expenses in the RPP. I can break.
I'm asking specifically about lawyers. I mean, obviously that would be the bulk of your expenses. So I'm talking about legal expenses. I mean, your terminology tells a lot in itself, because you use the terminology "we think we know." Well, in my view, you should know you know. I think in most Canadians' view, they would expect you to know that you know what the amounts are.
I do know, but I don't have it at my fingertips. It's in the RPP, how much money we're spending on lawyers.
Okay, yeah, and if you could produce that for us, that would be great. I want to move on to section 5.66. I just want some explanation.
Is there an undertaking here that they will produce it?
They're going to produce an accounting for the costs spent on lawyers, whether they're paid for by the Justice Department or other departments.
2 weeks? Okay. Mike, you're out of time.
I'll finish on this on 5.66 because I'd like a little bit of an explanation on this. The department, we found that they'd taken some steps since 1993. I know this has been talked about a little bit to improve collection of detailed timekeeping. Department informed us that it introduced the timekeeping in 1996, so it took 3 years to introduce it. But by 2003, timekeeping was used by most council, although not consistently. That's 7 more years, so that's 10 years in total. And it took till 2006 for you to make it mandatory. 3 more years, that's 13 years. I would like an explanation as to why it would possibly take that long to come up with these answers. And I'm wondering what we should expect moving forward from this most recent report in terms of action. I'm hoping that it won't take 3 years just to start introducing preliminary steps, and then 10 more years to complete the process. I'd like an answer, though, if I could.
we got an answer, a very brief answer.
All lawyers are on timekeeping since December 2006. I don't know what happened between 1993 and 1996 and 2003. We're working actively to implement a very good report by the Auditor General. We have action plans, and we're at work at that now. So we're going as fast as we can to implement these kinds of reports, as I've indicated.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. Christopherson, 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I thought for a minute there maybe Mr. Lake was going to get into a Rumsfeld explanation of knowns and unknowns and unknown unknowns. Just to wrap up, because we've only got time really for one question, just help me understand something. It's around the lack of a human resources strategy. Given the 4 years now that I've been on this committee, more and more one of the important elements of managing complex, particularly professional staff that are specialized, is a human resource strategy, particularly where there's competition elsewhere for them. And we know that there's growing pressures on legal services. We also know that there's a lot of specialized legal services in government. And so I'm just, I'm not hitting hard. I'm going to ask the question and sit back, sir, and what you answer. But I'm just having trouble understanding how you could have gone so long. I know you're working on it now, so it's not that. But how did we get to the point where a department like this, with all the issues I've just mentioned, could go so long without a human resource strategy, given that individual skills of your employees is your product? So I don't know how you managed over the last 15, 20 years without one. So if you could help me understand at a practical level, how could a department as important as yours go so long without a human resource strategy? Thanks, Chair.
We have a human resource strategy. It's sitting here on the table in front of me. It covers 3 years. We have priorities and active.
I'm sorry.
active
When was that? When was that brought forward?
July 2007.
Okay. So let's pretend that I'm asking a whole year ago.
Right.
Okay. And let's just put the question then. How did you get to the point you went so long until last year where you didn't have one?
I don't remember what instruments, what tools we had before we had this human resources management plan. I obviously agree that one has to be strategic in managing people. People are, in fact, as you said in your preamble, critical, and we have always treated them as a prized resource. What I guess this brings is the strategic element to ensure that we're addressing things like succession planning and so on. But this is a good plan, and we're working it.
I had hoped for a little more, but I accept that, Deputy. Thanks, Chair.
Much, Mr. Christopherson. Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. Hubbard, 4 minutes.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chair. We're looking at a 35-page report, and you know, there's hardly a page there isn't a suggestion or a concern expressed with it. Most of my life I spent trying to evaluate things. If I were to read this report, I would have great concerns. But as the author of the report, would you give this report, Managing the Delivery of Legal Service to the Government, an A, an A minus, a B, a C? You know, in all fairness, we should have some ranking of how this particular report rates in terms of what we should receive. Somebody back home reading it would think that the darn thing was maybe already, if it hadn't already, it'd be soon falling apart. But, you know, is it an A report in terms of the evaluation that was done? Is it an A minus, an A plus, a B, a C? Or is it to get a failing grade? I think in all fairness, we should try to find out, Mr. Chair, what is it an A report, Madam Fraser, or a B?
I really hate to do A's and B's. It is certainly not what we would consider a bad report. There are many areas where improvements are needed. I would say that many of the issues that we are raising are really about kind of management. And as we note at the almost one of the last conclusions, is that we think the department needed better professional management. With all due regard to the lawyers in the room, I don't think lawyers are always necessarily known for being the best managers, though some are. And I think the current deputy has certainly indicated throughout the audit and since the audit that he is concerned by good management and has taken a number of steps. And that's what our audits are really about, is trying to improve the management within departments.
So maybe it's a C-. It's just a barely passing grade.
I think it's better than a C-.
Better than, is it a C+? You know, I find it somewhat difficult. The deputy has said here, as deputy manager, I believe the department overall is doing well. At the same time as your report was issued, he says, my belief stems in part from results and feedback from Treasury Board Secretariat in its annual assessment. Now, Treasury Board Secretariat made an annual assessment of your department at the same time as this was published. Now, did you get an A from the Treasury Board? I assume that we've seen the paper about getting bonuses for doing good jobs in terms of people near the top. Did your people get bonuses to reflect they were doing A work? Or, as the Auditor General said, maybe I had trouble getting better than a B from what she said, but
I lose track a bit of the years, but on the last year's assessment of the Management Accountability Framework, we met or exceeded government standards on 16 out of the 20 core tests, and compared with the average of all their departments, we met or exceeded other government departments 19 out of 20 times. So
we'll give you an A- then. Thank you, Mr. Sims.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hubbard. Thank you, Mr. Sims. The last questioner, Mr. Fitzpatrick, and I understand he's going to flow over to Mr. Sweet for a brief point of clarification. Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, I want to go back to what Mr. Williams was approaching, talking about the two different legal opinions of the appropriation of funding for the firearms registry. You know, I'm going to be very blunt about it. We were on that committee. We saw the opinions. I'm a lawyer. I saw the opinions. I think there's real argument about whether they were much the same. But the impression I have is we had a group of people huddled together and say, my goodness gracious, we're in a lot of trouble. Not only might have violated the Treasury Board guidelines, which would get us the wet noodle treatment, but we might have actually broken the law under the Public Administration Act, and worse yet, we might have violated the Constitution of Canada. And within hours, they found a lawyer somewhere that came up with a legal opinion that backed up the decision they had made, and got into very exotic technical points like contingent liabilities and so on. It was a very detailed sort of report. I guess that's the difficulty I have with what I saw happen on that. It's just as if department heads can phone over to the Justice Department and find some lawyer to cover their tracks for them when they get themselves into difficulty. And the only further comment I'll have on that, sir, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Sweet. There's a couple of lawyers, one of them a Canadian lawyer, that got entangled in a very major trial in Chicago last year that found out where that can get them into if they want to walk down that line. And I guess a lot of us had concerns about this matter, and I'm just going to register it with you. I have suspicions about the whole matter. I'll be 100% honest on that matter. And the auditor's report, by the way, at the end of the whole exercise too, came back and reconfirmed the position given by the original lawyer. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Sweet. Obviously, we don't agree on that point, so that's why I'm making a comment rather than a question. If you want to comment, go ahead.
I think it is important that I do comment. As I indicated in answer to the questions dealing with tabling legislation and is the legislation that goes into the House of Commons constitutional or not, we take our duties under the Justice Act very seriously. We believe fervently in the rule of law. We see it as our duty to give honest, fearless advice to the Government of Canada on all legal matters, and we do. And I think that the example we're all pointing to is an isolated example of a situation where these two opinions suddenly arose. I know the lawyers in question, and I believe them to have acted in utmost good faith, each of them. So we're not in the business of giving comfort opinions. We give our best advice as fearlessly and as honestly as we can. And I'm sorry that you and I disagree, but I believe very, very deeply that's what I just said.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. Sweet, you have a
Mr.
question.
Chairman, I believe one of the points that Mr. Hubbard was trying to make in his last round of questioning was that in this report there's a long litany of things that plays out to less than effective management. And right at the end of the report, the Auditor General summarizes, and certainly if I'm misrepresenting, please feel free to intervene. But there's three specific recommendations from the Auditor General's office. One is about information and workloads. One is about financial arrangements, which I questioned already. And then the last one is very specific, to ensure that a senior manager with the necessary authority leads the improvement of management practices at the department and oversees implementation of these changes. Now, the response from the department was not as specific as I would like to see it. We are a committee of accountability, not management, I understand. But if they're not going to hire someone or put someone in a position, as the Auditor General said, I would like to have more, how do I say, comfort than just having a sentence saying that we're going to work on management practices that will be strengthened. So could I just get a direct answer? Am I representing that recommendation properly, Madam Fraser? And could I get a direct answer from Mr. Sims whether they intend to put that senior person in that is a professional manager and not per se a lawyer?
Refer to the page.
Well,
by the way, the page for reference is 27 and 28.
We take very seriously the need to professionalize management. As I've tried to indicate, we have taken a number of important steps to create a very powerful management sector that puts in place a structure that we think will allow us to manage effectively. Mr. McCauley is not just a lawyer. He has an extensive experience in recent years managing some very significant projects for us. Some justice lawyers are also very good managers. It doesn't follow that because one's a lawyer, one cannot manage. I take the point that not all lawyers manage, absolutely, but to say that justice lawyers can't manage is clearly not true. And some of our best and brightest are sought out by other government departments around town to come over and run big things, and they run it very effectively. Mr. McCauley is an excellent manager, and I have every confidence that he is doing a superb job. And we have the structure, and we have a good person in place, and I think we're taking the recommendation of Ms. Fraser very seriously.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, was not to denigrate the legal profession nor infer that they couldn't manage. But is Mr. Sims saying that Mr. McCauley is actually fulfilling that role that was identified in the Auditor General's recommendation?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sweet. Thank you, Mr. Sims. That concludes the questions. On behalf of the committee, I want to thank all the witnesses for appearing here today. And I'm going to ask the Auditor General now, do you have any closing comments or remarks?
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to thank the committee for their interest in the report. I know throughout the hearing that several members have had questions around specific actions and timelines, and I'd just like to suggest perhaps you would want to ask the department for their detailed action plan that would give you that information.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Fraser. And in following up, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Mr. Sims, and perhaps if you could address that question and perhaps also the action plan that's talked about, if you could tell us if you're prepared to file that with the committee at this point in time.
Yes, I am. I'd be pleased to do that. I think in light of the questioning, that's a very appropriate response. Be pleased to do that. And there were also a number of other questions that members asked that we didn't have detailed answers for, and we'll give that to you quickly.
Within 2 weeks, sir?
Yes.
That's fine. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, again, I want to thank you for appearing here today. The committee has a couple of other items that we're going to discuss in camera. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to suspend this meeting right now, and we will resume in about 60 seconds' time.